Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TechGeek webinar series, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing of knowledge is the key to enhance our skills and grow us as professionals. With this principle in mind, we have initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give you all a crisp insight of various domains. The topic of today's session is assigning resources and costs. This is the fifth session of the Microsoft Project 2010 series. This series is being conducted by Mr. B. Sai Prasad, Senior Manager, Learning and Development, Cognizant Technology Solutions India Private Limited. So without further delay, I introduce you all to our guest speaker. Over to you, Mr. Sai.
Thank you. So good evening all participants. I welcome you all again for the session 5 of this Project 2010 series. Here we are going to talk about how to do assignments in Project 2010. If you have observed the last 4 sessions of the series, we would have discussed on how to custom setting a project, how to create your work breakdown structure, setting dependencies. And in the last session, we talked about how to set up different types of resources as a part of Project 2010. So in today's session, we are going to look at how to assign these resources to your activities so that we are having a draft schedule based on which we can do optimization. So the key takeaways of this 1-hour webinar is going to be on how to do assignments with respect to part-time and full-time people. We're going to look at how assignment-specific fields which you need to understand and manipulate in order to make better assignments in Project 2010. We will also discuss how to control the effect of the different variables like work, duration, and units that is going to be used as a part of my assignment. We will conclude with all the different methods for doing assignments and what we mean by critical path and how to identify it in Project 2010. So let's have a quick recap of what we discussed in the last session of setting up resources. I hope you know, depending on which industry you come from, you might say people are my resources. It could be facilities, it could be missionaries, it could be materials, or it could be even money that could be considered as resources. So resources are generally people, facilities, equipment, materials, and money that will help us to create your end product of your projects. We made use of a couple of views like a resource sheet through which we added this resource information. Adding resources is very critical in terms of building a schedule. If you are expecting the availability of those resources will severely impact your schedule development. And also if you have a criteria based on which you want to track and optimize your resources, naturally adding resource information is very much important. So if you say resources are very important in terms of building your project plan, naturally this section is also going to be very important because here we are going to discuss how to assign these resources to the different activities what we have scheduled. So let's take a very simple example of what we mean by assignments. So assignment just talks about how much of work is being done by the individual resources. So on the screen before you are able to see a resource called Designer 2 has been assigned to 2 tasks like identify stakeholders and conduct workshop. Maybe in identifying stakeholders he is doing 40 hours, maybe in conducting workshop he spends 8 hours of job. And towards your right you can see how the work is getting divided across multiple days. Maybe if you look at conduct workshop, the 8 hours is getting spread across Thursday and Friday as 4 hours and 4 hours. Maybe the 40 hours is being split across 4 days as 8 hours per day. So the simple formula that is used in order to decide how much effort needs to be scheduled for the individual resources is given below. It is duration into units is what we call as work. So here work is what we call as effort. So if you look at Designer 2, it has been assigned to conduct workshop. Okay, and the effort is actually 8 hours here. So the 8 hours of work is completed in 2 days, which is duration is 2 days, and how much units he spends on the individual day is around 50%. So this is a very simple formula that is being used behind the scenes in order to calculate the duration, effort, and how much units that resource should work on the task. Now let's move on to a level below this. So what are the different assignment specific fields you need to understand so that you have better confidence in doing assignments in Project 2010? So I can just categorize these 3 steps. The first one is we need to understand the different start dates like the task start date and finish date, the resource start date and the finish date, the assignment start and the finish date. With
Mr.
respect to units, we have something.
Mr. Sai, your voice is not clear. It's breaking. Your voice is breaking.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, it's clear.
Okay. So with respect to units, we have three types of units. That is the assignment units, we have the max units, we have what we call as peak units. And finally, we have the work like task work, resource work, and assignment work. So I'll just take a simple example to illustrate what are these three specific fields. Let's start with start and finish. So I'm just going back to my project 2010. So currently I'm looking at my Gantt chart. So you can just look at, let's take the example of the first activity here, which is identify stakeholders. So if I'm trying to assign a resource, for example, let's say engineer for this activity, you can see that this activity currently starts on 3rd of December and it completes on 5th of December. So you can see that the start and finish, what you're seeing here is the task start date and the task finish date. But let's look at the information of the engineer 1 year. So for which I'm just going to my view resource sheet where you have the engineers. So when you double click the engineers, you are able to see certain resource related information here where you have some available from and available to. So this ideally tells from what date to what date is this resource allocated to your project. So you can ideally say this resource is allocated to this project from October 1st to end of December. So which means throughout these months is allocated to the project. So this is the resource start date and this is the resource finish date. But now let's come back to the same sheet again. The third set of start and finish you need to understand is the assignment start and the assignment finish. What do we mean by assignment? So if I just go to the task form, so you can see on the bottom I have the task form for this particular task. So it says that the engineer is working on this activity. So let me look at the schedule. So it says that this engineer is going to work on this task from 3rd of December and it completes on 15th of December. So you might see your task start date and your assignment start more or less looks similar. So I'm just going to assign another resource, let's say designer 1. So what you can ideally do here is you can say engineer 1 is not going to start on 3rd of December, instead is going to start only on 5th. So you can see your task start date is totally different, whereas the assignment start date of that resource is going to be totally different in this case, because each resource is taking their own long time to complete this task. So this is the first information or the field you need to understand in terms of start and finish. The second is the assignment unit or the max unit or the peak units. So when I try to look at my Gantt chart, you see that there are two resources working, and when I look at the work, you can see both of them are assigned to this activity 100%, which means if this resource is working 8 hours per day as per their calendar, which means they are going to work 8 hours in this activity for the next 3 days. So that is what this unit is. So the unit what you see on the bottom where I'm trying to point to, this unit is what is called as the assignment unit, because this is more at an assignment level. The next unit which we need to understand is when I go to the resource sheet, if you look at my engineer 1, from this date to this date, this tells how much percentage is allocated to the project. So that is, this is ideally meaning by what we call as the max units. So we talked about assignment unit and we talked about max units. The third one is called as peak units. What I mean by peak units is, if I just go back to my Gantt chart, here the assumption is that engineer 1 and designer 1 are working on this activity for 8 hours per day for 3 days, which means they are allocated to this activity on a flat percentage. Maybe you want to have a different percentage on different days. Maybe on the first day you want them to work only for 50%, the second day you might want them to work for 75, and the third day it might be 100%. So the way to do that is, if I just go to my view tab, you have a view called resource usage. So let me remove my task form. So you're looking at my engineer 1 here. So currently engineer 1 is working on this activity 8 hours per day, which means he is working 100%. So though the task level is working 100%, Microsoft Project provides you a way by which you can control how much units will be going to work on individual days. So to better understand what is peak units, I'm just going to right click on my time phase data and let me click on detailed styles and I'll just go for peak units. So when you add the peak units, you're able to see it is also 100% because he's going to work only 8 hours per day. For example, if I say on Monday is going to spend only 4 hours, you can see the peak units on that day is going to reduce to 50%. Maybe on the remaining days it is still 100%. So this is the second field which you need to remember. The third one is called as work, which can be task work, which can be resource work, or the assignment work. I have already talked about task work. So if you look at your Gantt chart, I hope you remember this resource total hours needs to be spent is around 44 hours. But if I look at my resource usage, you can see that this resource is working on this activity only for 20 hours, whereas the other designer is working on this activity for 24 hours. So this hours what I've just selected, 20 hours, is what is called as the assignment work. And the third one is called as the resource work. So when I say resource work, this resource on this project spends totally 20 hours. For example, if I'm trying to assign 2 activities to this engineer, you are able to see engineer is working on 2 activities. So the total effort spent by this engineer on the overall project is around 36 hours. So the 36 is what is called as resource work, whereas this 20 hours is called as assignment work, and the 16 hours is called as assignment work with respect to the next activity. So understanding these fields are very much critical for you to better work on assignments. Now the next step what we need to do is after understanding the fields, you need to choose the right task type. So before I talk about task type, we have already talked about this formula, that is the duration into units is what is effort. So if an activity is taking 5 days to complete and if I have one resource working on it, naturally the total effort is going to be around 40 hours. So as you can see, the formula is very simple. Duration is equal to work divided by number of people who are working on it. So I want you to visualize these 3 variables as 3 sides of an equilateral triangle like this, like duration, work, and units. So whenever you are doing an estimation as a part of scheduling, you might have different scenarios there. There are certain type of activities where you might do a duration-based estimate. There are certain activities where you do an effort-based estimate. So when you do a duration-based estimate, you would like to keep the duration fixed, whereas the other 2 variables to change. For example, if I have done a duration-based estimate, I would like to keep my duration side fixed, which means if I increase my work, naturally my unit should be affected, or if I reduce my unit, my work should be affected, whereas my duration should not change. Similarly, if you have done an effort-based estimate, naturally you need to keep your work as fixed, whereas when you change your duration, the unit should change. When you change the units, the duration should change. So depending on what type of model you are trying to follow, you need to keep one of these 3 sides as fixed so that the assignments can work properly. So let me give a small example to make you understand how this task type works. So I've just opened a blank schedule, and the first step is whenever you type a new task name, let's say prepare document, you know that by default in project 2010, all tasks are manually scheduled. So please ensure that before you work on the task type, you just change the task mode to auto scheduled by default, and for this activity also I'm just going to make it auto scheduled. The second step is I'm just going to insert a column called work. The work is what we mean by effort generally. Fine. Now I have an activity, and let me add a resource to this plan. Good. Now I have one activity and I have a resource. So let's say that for this activity I'm just going to do a effort estimate first. So based on how much of work needs to be done on this document, we have done an analysis and we have estimated this is going to take 40 hours. So I'm just going to say the total effort for this task is 40 hours. Remember, I have not assigned any resource to this activity. But before I do the assignment, I want to tell MS Project that my work should be fixed in this case. So let me open this task, and on the advanced tab, there is an option called task type. This is also called as type in general terms. I'm just going to change the type to fixed work, which means the work is fixed in this case. When my work is fixed, you can see my effort driven flag will be disabled. What I mean by effort driven is whenever you are trying to add any other task type other than fixed work, like fixed duration or fixed units, you can see the effort driven gets enabled. So when your effort driven gets enabled, what it means is you can either tell MS Project whether the work should be fixed or the duration should be fixed in that case. So I'm just going to keep my work fixed in this case. So let me have it as fixed work, and let me say OK. Okay. So once I have done that, the next step is I need to start assigning this resource. So let me do the assignment. I hope you can see this resource. The moment we assign, the duration gets calculated as 5 days. So since it is a fixed work, if I try to increase the duration to 6 days, I hope you are able to see the effort does not increase, whereas the total unit that is being spent by that particular resource is going to change in this case. So if I just look at my task details on the form on the bottom, you are able to see this activity is done by this resource for 100%. Though the total hours is going to be 40 hours, you can see on the bottom that this resource is not spending 8 hours per day. Instead, the 40 hours is spread evenly across 6 days, and you can see the total peak units is going to reduce here. So you can see the peak units would not be 100%, it would be less than 100% on those days. So the definition is, please remember, whenever before you start doing the assignment, make sure that the task mode is auto scheduled, because only for an auto scheduled activity you can set your task type. So this is an example to make you understand what is a fixed work. So let's take another example. Let's say I want to review a document, and let's say for reviewing a document we have done a duration based estimate. We say this activity should be completed in 5 days. Now I'm just going to open my task information, and I'm just going to change it to fixed duration. And let me first assign this resource. You can see on the bottom the same resources assigned to my review document. You can see you're doing only 8 hours work per day. Now if I increase my effort from 40 to, let's say, 60, now you are able to see, since the 60 hours needs to be completed in 5 days, the resource ideally spends 12 hours per day on this particular task. So whenever you are trying to do the assignment, please remember to change the task type so that you can have control over what variable should be fixed, what can ideally change. So just to give you a quick recap of what we discussed, make sure that the task mode is auto-scheduled and select the right task type. Okay, so if you are doing a duration-based estimate, make sure it is fixed duration and effort-driven is no. The reason why I say effort-driven is no is, if effort-driven is yes, what happens is your work will, your duration will automatically be changed, because when you say effort-driven, effort is fixed whereas duration is flexible. Whereas when effort-driven is no, naturally duration is fixed in this case. Whereas if you are doing a work-based estimate, have your type as fixed work. But if you are entering both duration and work for a specific task, you need to decide which of these two will always be constant most of the time, and accordingly you need to change your task type. Once you have selected your task type, step 3, enter either your duration estimate or your work estimate and provide the other value. So if you are doing a duration estimate, after providing the duration value and you want to change the work, naturally the units will get affected, or change the units, the work will get affected. Now I think we have understood what are the different fields with respect to you need to understand and what are the possible values you can set for some of these fields. So let's directly dive onto some of the options in terms of assigning resources to activities. So the first view which I want to show you is called as Team Planner view. Before I show you this view and what it talks about, you need to remember this view is available only in Project 2010 professional version. It is not available in the standard version of Project 2010. Secondly, whenever you are trying to talk about building a forecastable schedule, right, naturally you need to look at minimizing constraints as a part of building a schedule. Whereas in Team Planner, what happens is you cannot build a forecast-ready schedule, as you will see in my next demonstration. Rather, you can only delegate the activities to different resources. When I say delegate, you can ideally say this activity is going to be done by this resource, or this resource is going to start on this activity and so on so date. So naturally, when you use Team Planner, project will force you to put constraints that might make your schedule less dynamic in nature. So without further delay, let's talk about how to use the Team Planner. Fine. So maybe let me have some of these resources assigned. As you can see, not for all the activities I have assigned the resources. So in order to access the Team Planner, you can just go to the View ribbon where you can hit the Team Planner, or you can go to the Resource ribbon where you can hit the Team Planner button. When you hit the Team Planner button, based on your current date, the time scale will be positioned. So you can see on your screen, there are 4 quadrants available. To the top leftmost corner, you can see the list of resource names, and you have a section called Unscheduled Task. What I mean by unscheduled activity is you have an activity assigned to these resources, but the start date and the finish date is not yet calculated. So you might wonder, how can that be? Remember, if you are having a manually scheduled task, naturally for a manually scheduled task, you have freedom to decide when should the activity start or finish. So it is not necessary that the start and finish needs to be calculated. So I'm just going to go back to my Gantt chart to give you what that looks like. So let's say I have a So as you can see, this activity currently is auto-scheduled. So let me make it manually scheduled, and I have the freedom to remove the start date or the finish date of this activity. So let me say this activity is going to take 5 days, and I've just assigned it to one of the engineers. So you can see this is not a auto-scheduled activity. I just add some resource as an accountable for this activity. So if I change my view to the Team Planner, you can see the approval to is listed on my unscheduled task because the start date and the finish date is not available for approval to. You can see there is a small difference in terms of the color. You can see activities that are auto-scheduled, which means those will have a start and a finish date, will be shaded in light blue color, where manually scheduled activity will be in teal color, which will be, I can say, a dark greenish color. That is what you see as approval to. And towards your bottom, you can see some unassigned activities. Coming back to unassigned, you can further categorize as auto-scheduled or manually scheduled. So if I have an activity but I'm not assigned it to any resource, that will be available on the bottom. So manually scheduled unassigned activity will be on the bottom right leftmost corner. On the bottom rightmost corner, you can find the auto-scheduled activities here. Now let's look at how to use this Team Planner first. As I've already told you, Team Planner will not help you to build a forecastable schedule. The reason is, when you try to make assignments through this Team Planner, project will automatically set constraints on those activities, okay? Which means those activities what you're assigning will start only on or after a particular date, which means it will not be flexible like as soon as possible. So let's take a small example here. So you can see there is an activity called a conduct workshop. Let's say if I want one of the designers to do it, actually you can see that there are 2 designers, and you can see on those 2 weeks they're relatively available. So you can just One option is you can just drag that bar like this and you can drop it on the day when you want that resource to work. So the moment you dragged and dropped it, just hold on. Yeah, you are able to find this resource. Designer 1 is working on this particular activity called conduct workshop. So another way of doing it is, if you don't get this drag and drop, you can also right click that particular task bar where you have a lot of options here like auto, manual. You have an option to inactivate that task so that it does not participate in scheduling. You always have an option to look at whether you want to reassign it to any of the other resources. So you can just chase that I want to move it to designer 1. So naturally you will get the same output. The second option I would like to demonstrate that is available in Team Planner is when you do a mouse over on top of any of these taskbars, you can see a very complete detailed information on the box. As you can see, maybe I cannot point the mouse. You can just look at the last statement in the conduct workshop tooltip that labels as task path. The task path will give you the list of the predecessors of the conduct workshop. So if I just do a mouse over on top of it, you can see that it starts with the sample project, which is the level 0, and under which you have requirements, and under requirements you have the conduct workshop activity. So if you look at identify stakeholders, you can see how these activities have been connected in terms of the schedule. And when you try to do a right click, you can see to the you can see there's a small formatting toolbar that will appear where you can also update some percentage complete. When I say this conduct workshop is 50% complete, you can see the color will ideally change. 50% will be in dark blue color, the remaining 50% will be in light blue color. So though I will talk about how to update percentage complete as a separate session, but this is just to tell you an easy way by which you can update your percentage complete. So I'm just going to do a couple of them, and let's say that, yeah. So as you have already seen, I have tried to move these resources or activities across multiple resources. I hope you remember the conduct workshop was dragged and dropped, or we reassigned it to the resource through the team planner. If I now go to my Gantt chart, you can see those activities for which I did assignments. You can see on the indicators column, there is a constraint that has been placed. Carefully observe for conduct workshop, it has put a constraint like this task has a start no earlier than constraint. This appears because of two reasons. First, we use team planner. In team planner, whenever you try to do a drag and drop, for all auto-scheduled activities, a constraint will be put. If you want to remove this constraint, one option is select those multiple activities like this, and you can just hit the task information option on your task ribbon, and you can say on my advanced tab, the constraint is as soon as possible. So as I've already said, team planner is more useful only for delegating, which means you want to force work on a particular day and then you go for a team planner. Otherwise, if you want to build a forecastable schedule, I would recommend don't go for team planner. So this team planner view has been added only in Project 2010 Professional. It is not available in Project 2010 Standard as well as the earlier versions of Project. There are a few more colors which I think you might want to look at. Maybe a black color will be shown for certain tasks that are typically late. So if I just go back to my team planner, naturally you don't see any black color here because this project is actually starting only on the 1st of December. So let's say I say my status date is 28. What I mean by 28 is today's date is around 28th of December. You can see all my activities will be shaded in black color because these activities actually have to be completed by that date. But since this activity did not complete, it has been marked in black color in my team plan and indicating these are all late activities. Good. So this is the first simple view which you might want to use to do assignment. The second view is called as the task sheet view. I think a very similar option I already demonstrated when I explained you the different fields. So you can just change your view to the task sheet view through the views data group, and you have a series of checkboxes available here through which you can check and uncheck which resource you want to assign. If you look at your team planner, the only catch you are having here is though constraints are placed, one activity can be assigned only to one resource. You cannot say this activity should be done by multiple resources through team planner. But using the task sheet, so you can go to the view ribbon and you can go to the more views and select task sheet. So the task sheet will not have the chart area to the right hand side. Here you have an option to select multiple resource, which is not possible through team planner. But when you try to select multiple resource, project always assumes that they are assigned to this particular task to the maximum units, which means if this resource is allocated to your project, let's say 100%, which means he would be spending 100% of his time on this activity. But you might want to have control over that. You might want to say this resource is not going to spend 8 hours on that activity, rather is going to spend only, let's say, 50% or only 4 hours per day. For which you might want to go for the next option, which is called as the task information dialog box. So for which you can just, I'm just going to split my view to the bottom so that you can understand how it works. See, on the bottom, instead of the task form, I'm just going to have my task usage. So you can see that this resource is, these two people are working on this activity for 4 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, so and so. So if I want to say the individual resources who are working on this particular activity, they are not going to spend the assignment unit here is 100%, that's what I assume. But if you want to say they are going to spend only 4 hours per day on this particular activity, for designer 1 I can say it is only 50% here. So you can see the moment I say 50%, the 24 hours is getting divided across 5 days, 4 hours per day because I have given it as 50%. The second way of setting this assignment unit is you can double click the task on your Gantt chart. You can go to the resources tab through which also you can provide the same assignment units here. So but you will have a better clear picture when you're looking at your task usage, how this assignment units creates an impact in terms of the duration of this particular activity. The last one which I might want to demonstrate is the usage view, okay, which I have already shown you. But I would recommend that don't use it together like this, but I'm just going to change my view to the resource usage. The advantage in a resource usage is you will get a much better detailed picture about who is doing which activity in the project. So if you look at to the leftmost corner, you can see the list of assignments are grouped under different resources. So you can hide the subtask through the outline subtask option, and I can just look at one of the resources, let's say engineer 1, and you can see the engineer 1 is working on 3 different activities, whereas the designer 1 is working only on 2 activities. For example, if I want to move this activity, identify stakeholders from this engineer to designer 1, you just need to select that particular row, okay, and you just drag it and you move it below designer 1. Okay, I hope it is already assigned to designer 1. Maybe let me open designer 2. Now you are able to see both designer 1 and designer 2 together are working, but that assignment is totally released from engineer 1. So this is much an easier option. So you can even double click that particular assignment here, which opens up the assignment unit. It tells the assignment work the assignment start, assignment finish of that particular resource on this. If you remember on the last session, I was talking about the cost that can be assigned to the individual resources. When you are assigning cost to the people resources, I was talking about cost rate tables which can be A, B, C, and D. I said a resource can have multiple skill set. Depending on the skill set, you might want to use a different rate. So it is through the assignment information, cost rate table, you can ideally say which rate table should be used. Is it A, B, C, or D, or E? Once you have done the assignment, okay, I'm just going to go back to my Gantt chart. Once you have completed the assignment, right, you might want to look at the critical path as a part of your project plan. I hope you know what critical path is. Critical path gives you the minimum duration you need to complete a project. It is also the longest path as a part of your schedule. So for those who are totally new to critical path, if you just take a look at to your right hand side, you can see there are two paths in this schedule. See, the first path is the one that runs on the top, that is identify stakeholders, conducting workshop, maybe review findings, and maybe the last two activities. Path 2 is the first activity, the third activity, the fourth, fifth, and sixth. So you can see there are two paths available as a part of this schedule. So if you look at which decides your project start date and the project finish date, ideally it is only the first path. Because if you look at the second path, the create responsibility matrix just needs 1 day to complete, which means there is another 2 day available by which this task can be delayed. Whereas the first activities on the first path cannot be delayed because there is no time available for it to get delayed. So there are a few terms we will discuss to understand what is critical path. But let's talk about critical path from the point of project 2010. To view the critical path as in project 2010, there are multiple views you can use. The view what I'm looking at is the Gantt chart. Go to the format ribbon. You have an option here called critical task. You can see that on the bar styles. The moment you turn it on, you can see to your right, the critical path will be automatically marked in red color. What I mean by the red color is if I try to increase the duration of the activities on my critical path, what happens is your project finish date gets affected. Similarly, if I try to reduce the duration of any activity on my critical path, your project finish date is getting affected. But let's look at the create responsibility matrix. Let's say that the create responsibility matrix does not take 1 day, it takes 2 days to complete. As you can see, its finish date alone gets impacted, not the project finish date. So you can see that activities that don't fall on the activities that don't fall on the critical path will have some time available. The time available by which it can be delayed is what we call as slack in project. So just below the critical task, you can see there is an option called slack. So when you turn on slack, you can see there's a black color line, a trailing line after this create responsibility matrix. You can see the slack says the task is finishing on this date, whereas the pre-slack is available till Tuesday. So, but if you want to have a numerical figure about this total slack, you can just either insert a column here called total slack. You can see create responsibility matrix is having a 2-day slack. What it means is if my duration increases from 1 day to 3 days, naturally it not have any impact on my project finish date. But if my slack increases by more than 3 days, if I say 4 days, you can see a conduct workshop becomes non-critical, whereas the second part becomes critical. So what is equally important for us as project managers is we need to focus on the critical path, and we also need to focus on the near critical path, which means those activities that have a float that is very close to, let's say, 2 days or 3 days. But I have found a few project managers, they might have a threshold limit. They might even say that even if the total float is 2 days, it should still be marked as critical because I just want that to be noticed when I prepare the schedule. But by default, project always says critical path means those activities that have a 0 slack available. That is the reason it's only the first part that is being marked in red color. But if you want to create responsibility matrix also to be part of the critical path, because it is having a very small slack. You can just go to the File options. You can just find on the Advanced tab, there is an option through which you can decide, maybe the place where I'm now pointing to, you can see task or critical if the slack is less than or equal to 0. Now I need to make it as 2 days here. So when I say 2 days, any activity that of 2 or less than 2 will also be made as critical. You can see now to your right, even this activity has been marked as a critical activity. So these are some of the changes which you might want to look at whenever you are trying to look at your critical path. But towards your left, if you want to highlight your critical activities in a different color, you can just go to the format, and you have an option to click on format bar size. Sorry, you can just click on format, I can say text styles. Items to change, I can say critical task, and I can just give the color as red. So naturally everything becomes critical activities as a part of this particular schedule. But the best way to understand how critical path or how to validate whether all activities have been interconnected with each other, you can change your view to the network diagram, where you can see to your right, you can see how these activities have been connected, and the red color activity indicates that these are all critical activities by default. So critical path, as I already told you, it is the minimum duration to complete a project. There are a couple of ways to identify how a critical path is. But the critical path assumes that all your activities are interconnected with dependencies, okay? And please ensure that the slack what you are having on the non-critical activity is always greater than the threshold value. But by default, project will also say a task that I have a slack of 1 or 2 days is also a non-critical. But if you think 1 or 2 days is still critical for you, you just need to go to the file options to make sure that you relax that threshold value. So just to summarize, I talked about what do we mean by assignment, where we are trying to relate a relationship between the task and resources. We made use of this formula called duration is equal to work divided by units. So before you start doing assignment, make sure that the right task type, which could be fixed work, fixed duration, or fixed units, is set. Make use of the team planner, task sheet, task information, or the resource usage to assign your resources. Identify your critical path by making use of the format ribbon or by making use of the network diagram and reports to find that out. Good. So the next session, session 6, is all about how to convert this draft schedule to an optimal schedule, because we might have chances of the dates becoming unrealistic now, or it might be the resources are also overutilized or underutilized. So the next session is going to be on 8th of November. So thanks to you guys. So if you have your feedbacks, please visit my Facebook page, Sai the Simple, and just post your feedback through the post link available. So over to Mohini, are there any questions?
Yes, Mr. Sai, there are some questions that have come up. I've already assigned you.
Yeah, thank you. So if I want to, okay, this is a question from Venunath. If I want to assign multiple resources for a single task, how can I do it in the resource usage view? Okay, that's a good question. Let's take that first. So I'm just going to go back to my resource usage. Fine. So by default, if you look at it, this question is if I want to assign this activity to another resource. As you can see, when I try to drag and drop, you are moving a resource. You are not splitting this task across multiple ones. So what I would recommend in this case is you just need to make sure that you turn on the details, okay? You turn on the details through the view ribbon. And let's say for the worker one, if I want to assign my identify stakeholders, you just need to select on the bottom what activity you might want to say here. So let's say the activity here is identify stakeholders. Yeah. Yeah. So as you can find here through the resource usage, as you can see, there is no direct way by which you can do the assignments. What I would recommend is you need to have your task form on the bottom. Maybe the way you do it is just turn on the task form. And task form, let's say if you want to assign this activity, identify stakeholders to multiple resources, maybe just choose the other resource here and say OK, which means that the worker 2 will also be now assigned to it. Let's create. So worker 1 is now assigned to identify stakeholders. So now you can see your worker 1 is also assigned. So the steps is make sure that you turn on the details, have the task form on the bottom. When you say the task form on the bottom, make sure that you select the task to which you want to assign it. So once you have selected the task, use the resource name drop down in the task form to do the assignment. Can we change the assignment after the work has started? Some amount of work has been completed. Yeah, this is a question from Binoy. Okay. Yeah, that is totally quite possible because we have requirements that way. Let's take this example. Let's say the identify stakeholders, now the duration is around 8 days. If this activity is already, for example, 50% complete, okay, and I'm just going to go a very crude way of doing it. So you can see this activity is already 50% complete. So now these are the 3 resources who are working on this, designer 1, designer 2, and worker 1. Let's say you want to replace your designer 1 or you want to remove designer 1 from this particular one. But when you try to remove this resource just by a blind delete, what happens is the actual work spent by that designer 1 is also getting erased. So what I will suggest is, instead of deleting it that way, I will just turn on the task usage. I'll insert a column called actual work. So rather than deleting that particular resource from that task, I would ideally go for a different option like replace. So I'm just going to select the task. Please remember I'm now looking at a task usage. I've selected the task. On my resource ribbon, you can go for the assign resources option. On the assign resources option, if I just want the designer 2 to be removed, okay, or I want him to be replaced. Let's take that scenario. I want designer 2 to be replaced with engineer 1. When I say replace, it's only the remaining incomplete work of designer 2 needs to be moved to engineer 1. So first, let me look at the actual work. You can see my designer 1 has spent 12 hours. There is a remaining 8 hours pending. So this remaining 8 hours of my designer 2 alone needs to be moved to the, let's say, engineer 1. So I've selected that particular task. I've clicked on assign resources. I've selected designer 2 whom I need to replace. I click on the replace button. I select the engineer 1 and I say OK. Carefully observe what happened. Designer 2 is actual work and the total work is still 12 hours because he has completed what he was supposed to do. the remaining 8 hours of work has been moved to engineer 1. You can see it as 8 hours. And that 8 hours, you can see it has been scheduled on Wednesday, because that 8 hours work on Wednesday has been moved to engineer 2. So this is with respect to, I can say, replacing one resource with another resource when the work has started. If you want to remove a resource from that work, it's quite simple. Let's say I want to say in the worker 1 has spent 16 hours, there is a remaining 16 hours pending, and I just want that resource will need to be nullified. I can just add this column called remaining work, and for my worker 1, I'm just going to say remaining work is 0. So the moment I say 0, you can see the total work is also 16, his actual is also 16, which means designer, that is the worker 1, is released from this activity. I hope this answers the next question. About 55% of IT projects are schedule and cost overrun. How do you recommend to override this? There is no, I think it's very true. Okay, so it's nothing to do with how they build a schedule. I think the most common challenge is estimation. Okay, one of the common challenges what I find with respect to the IT projects is we need to have a record of the estimates what we have prepared for the earlier projects. If you have done that, naturally those estimates can be reused so that we can learn from our experience so that the same mistake cannot happen. So the lessons learned documentation is something must, and it should be a responsibility of every team member to do it. The second is there are certain estimation techniques available like use case point, function point estimation that is used for IT projects. So those estimation techniques are very scientific in manner. But what complements it is a flavor of experience. So you need to add some reserve or contingency on top of that estimate based on your experience and your fair understanding of it. And the third is we should not do a project more from the point of running getting a profit out of that project. You need to do projects to do more projects for the same customer. Okay, so it should not be from the point of getting a revenue or business from them. Why don't you recommend using resource usage view? Vivek, we made use of the resource usage view. I recommend it, but the resource usage view, as you can see, will not allow you to assign the same task to multiple. There is no option by which you can assign one task to multiple resources. So that is the reason why I was suggesting you need to have a task form on the bottom. Shweta says difference between resource units and over-allocation units in resource sheet. Okay, fine. I'll just show you what she's trying to talk about. Yeah, this is the max units. I don't know what units you're talking about. There is something called over-allocated. I don't see any over-allocated units, Shweta. Maybe if you can just clarify your question, you can try to answer that. Okay. When do we offer fixed units task type? Okay. Fixed units is not so often used, but fixed unit is used if you want to have control over the assignment unit of that particular resource. For example, if you want to say, irrespective of how long the task is going to take or how much effort is required to complete this task, I don't want this resource to spend more than 2 hours per day on this task, which means you are not worried about effort of the task, you are not worried about the duration of the task. You are only worried about the total percentage this resource is working on the task. So then you go for the fixed units. If I change the over-allocation units from 100 to 50 on resource sheet, will MVP update the same? I think you're talking about the max units here. I think that's what you're talking about. Remember, when you try to reduce your max units from 100 to 50, don't expect it will create an impact on this. Let me put this question in another way. As you guys can see that on my resource sheet, all the resources are assigned to my project 100%, which means they are working 8 hours per day. And based on this, naturally, you can see all my resources are also spending 100% on all these activities. Her question is, if I go to my resource sheet and I say engineer 1 is not allocated 100%, but is allocated only 50, will this 50 automatically apply at an assignment level? The answer is no. As you can see on my resource sheet for engineer 1, I try to reduce it to 50. But on my Gantt chart, you can find wherever I have assigned engineer 1, the assignment unit is still reflected as 100%. So since at a project level he is assigned 50, but at assignment level he is allocated more than 50, on those activities you can see a red color stickman appearing that he is over allocated. How do we take care of over allocated resource? Yogesh, you may need to wait for the next session because we are going to talk about how to do optimization for the resources. How do we allocate material and assets for certain type of task? Okay. Fine. So, okay, that was a good question. I'm just going to go back to my resource sheet. Okay, so here I have only people resources who are work resources. So let's say if I have a facility here, let's say I have your warehouse. And for a warehouse, if I say, I'm saying it's more a material resource because it is a facility. And for a facility, let's say the total cost or the rental cost of the material resource per month, for example, is around, or the total rental cost for the warehouse is, let's say, around 5,000 rupees. As you can see, I don't charge warehouse per hour. I'm just saying for warehouse, the total cost is around 5,000. Now I just go back to my Gantt chart and let me remove some of these resources. Fine. So for identifying stakeholders, let's say I'm trying to assign this material resource. I double click identify stakeholders. I selected warehouse. Since it is a material resource, the units will not be, or the assignment unit will not be in percentage. It will be in units like in decimals like 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I'm trying to say is for identifying stakeholders, I need 1 unit of warehouse. If you need 2 units of warehouse, you can always do 2 here. Okay. Now the moment I say 2, okay, so the moment I say 2, okay, you're able to see if I try to insert the cost for that resource, you can see the total cost is around 10,000, which means for 2 units it is around 10,000. But you might want to say, yeah, I need 2 units, but the rental cost is for week, which means I need 2 units per week. Okay, which means if this activity is going to take, let's say, 2 weeks, let's say it is going to take 2 weeks, you can see the total cost now has boiled down to 20,000, which means 10,000 per week and 10,000 for the other week. So when you are trying to assign a material resource, you can either provide units or you can either say how many units are you trying to consume per work period. It can be in day, week or month. Okay, so what is the difference between max units and units mentioned in the task details? Okay, yeah. So max units, what you're trying to talk about, right? The max units, what you're seeing here is the total units the resource can work in the project, or the billability, or how much percentage is this resource allocated to the project. That's what we mean by max units here. So here I'm trying to say engineer 1 is allocated to the project only 50%, which means as per his calendar, though he might be working 8 hours per day in the company, but to the project is working only 50% of that 8 hours working time. But on the Gantt chart, when I try to assign the engineer to any of the activities, you are having a freedom to tell whether he should work only 4 hours on this activity or less than 4 hours. So I can even say 25%, which means that he is going to spend only 2.5 hours per day on this particular task. So this is more at an assignment level, whereas that is more at a project level. When there are different types of calendars and resources, how would the duration of the activity be calculated? Fine. So when I have different resources, okay, so I'm just going back to my resource sheet. So you can see there are two resources here. Let's say designer 1 is using standard calendar, whereas worker 1 is using a night shift calendar. Maybe for those who are totally new to the standard and night shift, standard is that day shift calendar and night shift is the 9 p.m. to a.m. calendars. So I'm just going to go to a Gantt chart and let me assign this resource. Let's say for this particular activity, I'm just going to assign one of the resources, let's say designer 2. If I look at my task usage on the bottom, maybe if you look at the task usage, you can see the designer 1 is working on this activity 8 hours per day, because designer 1 is using the standard calendar and he works 100% on this activity, so it is 8 hours per day. If I'm trying to assign, let's say, another resource, for example, worker 1, you can see that worker 1 is playing a night shift calendar, which means a working time starts at 11 p.m. You can see for designer 2, it is 8 hours per day, whereas for designer 1, as per his calendar, it is being scheduled. Whereas if you look at the duration of this activity, it is going to be calculated from the start date of this activity to the finish date. It will just count how many days are there in between, and that's how the duration is getting calculated. But with respect to the individual days, naturally the respective resource calendars are used in order to schedule that particular work. Good, I think I've done with my answering. Mohini, are you there?
We have one more question.
One more question, okay.
Yeah.
How much buffer can we keep for each task? Can we keep it in a Gantt chart separately? It all depends on how confident that particular activity is. So I would recommend that if you don't want to expose your buffer, have it as a part of the duration or the effort estimate. Okay. But if you want that to be shown as a separate activity, I would recommend that don't have the task name like buffer. Instead, you can just use different terms like maybe maintenance work or coordination effort, so that you can just give a different name for it. So every plan will have some kind of contingency attached, but I would recommend that based on how important that particular buffer is. If you want to expose that buffer to the customer, make sure that you have the task name like contingency reserve or something else. If you don't want it to be done, I would recommend pad it as a part of the individual estimates, task estimates, so that your schedule can be dynamic.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Sai, for conducting the webinar. It was a great session. I would also like to thank all the participants for their support. The recording of the webinar will be available on techgeek.com by tomorrow. Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.